Researching this case has been full of hard questions. Questions that are uncomfortable to ask. I've experienced a few sleepless nights just thinking about the things that I've learned about September 3rd, 1990. I believe you have to be wired a certain way to handle the details of terrible things like rape and murder. One of the world's oldest philosophical questions that I found myself asking over and over is, why do bad things happen to good people? If you ask those questions to those who are older and wiser than me, they often respond quoting Ecclesiastes 3:1. There is an appointed time for everything, and there is a time for every event under heaven. But how could that be true when talking about such evil things? I really thought that I would be stuck in limbo, wondering what possible good could come from something so terrible. Little did I know that out of the ashes, truly improbable encounters could grow into beautiful friendships. You see, I grew up knowing Betty was killed taking care of a friend. But beyond hearing the name Mrs. Crigler in passing, she was just an anonymous character in a narrative I would rather forget. That is until 12 years ago, when fate aligned and the journey of learning the whole story began.
Homicide. Thanks for joining us. I'm Kathryn Crigler and Miss Betty Jones were brutally murdered inside Crigler's home on Labor Day 1990.
Were murdered on September 3rd, 1990. Their killer has never been found.
5 years ago, two women were murdered in Starkville, and their killer has never been caught.
In partnership with Swell Story Media, this is Knock Knock, the unsolved murders of Betty Jones and Kathryn Crigler. My name is Jason B. Jones.
Starkville Daily News, September 6, 1990. Caution called for. Starkville is usually a peaceful community. When violent crime strikes as close to home as it has recently, fear can run rampant. Unfortunately, in their fear and desire to protect their homes and loved ones, people sometimes make mistakes. We are told that interest in handguns in Starkville has shown a marked increase in the last 48 hours. We must remember that fear and handguns make dangerous bedfellows. While exercising a desire to protect what's ours, we must remember our children who find guns attractive playthings. We must remember that the pizza guy still delivers pizzas and might occasionally get the wrong door. There are still motorists who will have car trouble and need help or a phone. In short, every stranger might not be the bad guy. Every noise in the night might not necessitate an armed reply. We most certainly hope that the police are able to make an arrest quickly. Until then, a closed, locked door is probably still the best protection against crime. Be aware that even in our normally peaceful community, a certain mistrust of strangers is in order. And when in doubt, call 911. The police are still here to protect us.
I moved from Texas to Tennessee after a short stop in Florida in 2004 to take a job at Two Rivers Baptist Church in Nashville. I was still fresh out of college and really trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. At about the same time, a girl by the name of Rebecca Reeves had recently finished up her music business degree at Middle Tennessee State University and had come back home to work at the Gospel Music Association. Two Rivers was her home church, so being back in Nashville, she decided to get involved and join the choir. Well, as you can probably guess, this confident, career-driven woman fell for this dorky church staff member, and the two of us started planning our wedding for August 2005. I know, this sounds like a sappy love story, but hold on. This is where lightning strikes, and my new life collides with our story from the past. Let me paint the picture for you. My mother-in-law, Susan, who has since retired, was an elementary school teacher here in Nashville. When Rebecca and I became engaged, she was finishing up her 14th year of teaching at Dan Mills Elementary School. As a perk, Susan was able to use the school's library for Rebecca's bridal shower. Along with all of Rebecca's friends, Susan also invited her colleagues from the school, who were thrilled to celebrate Rebecca and meet her new in-laws. My parents and my brother had driven up from Houston to participate in both the wedding as well as the festivities leading up to the big day. My mom, Colleen, was so excited to attend the shower and met many new people who both knew Susan and Rebecca. While the party was wrapping up, she was introduced to a young art teacher who casually mentioned that she had gone to school in Mississippi. As they began to talk, they realized they had something shocking and impossible in common. Sitting across from my mom in Tennessee, 275 miles away from Starkville, Mississippi, was Juki Crigler Holt, Kathryn Crigler's granddaughter.
And so one of the teachers came back in and saw that I was kind of on my own, and sat down and just struck up a typical girl conversation. And so we just began to talk about life in general. And she was also planning on coming to the wedding later that weekend with her husband. And so we were talking about the bride and the groom and family, etc., and where I was from, where she was from. And all of a sudden, we realized that we had something in common. She had family in Mississippi, and I had family in Mississippi. And we began to talk about people that were still with us and people that were gone. And oh my gosh, it's Mrs. Crigler's grandchild.
I can remember Jason, your mother, was there, and we were all just kind of visiting, and somehow Mississippi came up. I don't know how it came up, but I think you have to be from Mississippi or have a grandparent in Mississippi to get excited about Mississippi when you see someone else from there. And so your mom and I immediately started going, okay, where, Mississippi? And so as soon as Starkville was brought up, then it was like, oh my goodness, well, my dad is born and raised there, and yada, yada, yada. And so she's like, well, what was his name? And I said, his name was Shep Crigler. And I can remember seeing your mom like a deer in the headlights. And when she and I put that together, that she was married to Betty Jones' son, that's when we put it all together, you know. And I learned that it was especially hard for your father, and he wasn't ever really able to even go back to Starkville. I
think she was in just as much shock as I was, and like, what are the odds? And, you know, I can't wait to tell my husband, I'm thinking, and she's thinking, I can't wait to call my parents. I mean, because there had been no connection for all those years, which at the time was 15, between both sides, not both, well, both families involved, because when everybody left Starkville, including those that left from death, nothing had been resolved. Everything was just kind of in limbo. And it was just incredible that we would meet again, the two families, in this way. I can't imagine what the numerical odds of that would have been, but it had to have been divinely inspired. She has a lot of memories of the house where her grandmother and Mama Betty were killed in, you know, many, many happy times in years prior. I mean, that was a big part of her childhood. I'm thinking that maybe that was the house that Miss Crigler and her husband lived in for many, many years. Maybe I don't know Julia's father, but maybe he even lived there in his youth.
Kathryn Crumpton was born to Dr. Joseph Walter Crumpton and Elizabeth Fondren Crumpton on January 7th, 1909. She attended school in Starkville, and after graduation went on to study at Mississippi State College for Women in Columbus. After, she married Albert Sidney Crigler Jr., and they had 2 children, a son, Albert Sidney Crigler III, and a daughter, Anita. For many years, she had a full-time career as an elementary school teacher in Starkville, and later in life, she worked for Mississippi State University. Professionally trained in music, she was an accomplished pianist and vocalist. Her family remembers that she was often asked to perform at her church as a wedding soloist. In 1981, she became a widow when her husband Albert passed away from cancer. You see, she was a cancer survivor herself, having endured a radical mastectomy in her early adulthood. In 1989, she became seriously ill again, and unfortunately this time, her leg needed to be amputated. This left Kathryn immobilized and mostly confined to a wheelchair. All through her life, she was an avid Mississippi State sports fan and enjoyed listening to or watching their games on the radio and television, a pastime that she shared with my grandmother and her friend Betty.
She was born in 1909, and after she went to school, she attended university.
She was very talented, particularly in the area of music, and she sang many solos at First Presbyterian Church, not only for church services, but also, for weddings and funerals and things of that nature. She went to New York, I think, shortly after she finished at MSCW to study voice, and lived with her sister, Anita, for a while there, and named my sister for her sister. And she goes by the name to this day.
That's Shep Crigler. He's Kathryn's son.
We came along, the children did at least, right during or prior to the World War II. But our family life was a typically happy family life in a neighborhood. We lived in a duplex, and during the last years of her life and my father's life, we moved into a house, bought a house.
I think that my dad may have been 10 or 11 when they moved into that house. And it was, I'll never forget, the address is 306 Lee Street. And then later on it became, Martin Luther King, because it's a main road through Starkville.
We moved in that house, I think, when I was about 15 or so. And this happened, in 1990?
But I was the only granddaughter. She had 3 other grandchildren that were all boys. And so I think we had a very special relationship. I mean, there were a lot of times that I would go to Starkville when I was a college student at Ole Miss. When I was in the 8th grade, my family moved from Oxford to Huntsville, Alabama. And I had always planned on going to State for college, but I missed Oxford so much that I returned to Oxford and went to Ole Miss. So there were many times while I was in Oxford in college that I would travel to Starkville, and visit my granny, and a couple times even take friends with me, that had met her as well. And then once I started college, one of my very best guy friends was born and raised in Starkville. And his name is James Brady, still a dear good friend of mine today. And he was actually the one that his mother called him, and he was the first one to my apartment that morning. She and I are very much alike. I mean, from our size 10 feet to our bunions to our cheekbones. Very, very, very similar bodies and everything. So I think even when in college, her highest weight was 150, as was mine. So we were very, very close.
She was a good mom. She was a little hard. I think my sister would probably think a bit, harder than I did. But she was a very strict mom and took care of most of the discipline in our family.
I can specifically remember going to an Ole Miss Tuscaloosa game and coming through Starkville on the way back, and I was with one of my good friends, Carrie Thomas, and we were planning on driving back to Oxford, but we were so sleepy that I don't even want to tell you what time it was that we called her in the middle of the night. But I know that when this happened, that home was so wonderful to me that I never was able to go there again. I never wanted to step foot in it again. And that's so sad to me. There were 2 bedrooms upstairs that belonged to my dad and my dad's sister, my favorite Aunt Nita. And those bedrooms, never changed. They were that way, all through me growing up and being there and visiting through college. And my granny also was a member at First Presbyterian Church, which was located just like right behind her house. We could just walk there.
This had been such a happy, for me and my children.
That's Crigler. She was Kathryn's daughter-in-law.
And him sometimes too. Yeah. Just a wonderful place to go. Just, just happy. And it just was destroyed by this horrible person.
My granny was, at that time, she was 80 years old. I think after, she turned 81 in January. But, she was sharp as a tack. She had osteoporosis and one time was frying an egg and her hip broke while she was frying the egg. And then she was a smoker all her life. And she was told one time that the circulation in her body was so bad that she could possibly have one of her legs amputated if she didn't quit smoking. And she quit smoking immediately and ended up losing her leg anyway. And so, she still, like I said at the beginning, she always had such a strong will and determination and just a very, very strong woman for that time. And, still wanted to drive and didn't want to lose her independence.
Starkville Daily News, November 13th, 1990. Kathryn Crumpton Crigler. Services for Kathryn Crumpton Crigler, 81, will be Wednesday at 3 p.m. at First Presbyterian Church, with burial at Memorial Park. Visitation will be today from 7 to 9 p.m. at Welch Funeral Home. A lifetime resident of Oktibbeha County, she was a retired secretary for the Extension Service and an alumnus of the Mississippi College for Women. Survivors include one son, Albert Sidney Crigler III of Huntsville, Alabama, one daughter, Anita Crigler Boyle of Aurora, Colorado, and 4 grandchildren. The Reverend Reginald Parsons and the Reverend Steve Davis will officiate.
Kathryn left her beloved home, where she had raised her 2 children and welcomed her 4 grandchildren, in an ambulance. She never returned. Instead, she lived in a nursing facility for the last few weeks of her life. I can't imagine what she was feeling in those last days. She had been brutally assaulted and was asked to relive it over and over as she strained to remember something she wished she could forget. while at the same time, she had tragically lost her friend Betty. How do you even process something so terrible? She was devotedly watched over by her doctors and her family up until the end. Also at her bedside that last day was Maggie Virgil, her friend and housekeeper who had been with her every step of the way. Kathryn's family had secured permanent employment for Maggie at the nursing home, and she stayed on there until her retirement. Years later, when Maggie passed away, all of the living members of the Crigler family were referred to as her godchildren in the obituary at her service.
The Clarion Ledger, November 14, 1990. Official. Assault. Death may be linked. Starkville. Oktibbeha County Medical Examiner Orville Musgrove said he believes the assault on 81-year-old Starkville woman suffered in September contributed to her death Sunday. Kathryn Crumpton Crigler died at a private nursing home in Starkville. She was taken there upon her recent discharge from Oktibbeha County Hospital. She was hospitalized after she was assaulted, and her friend Betty Jones, 65, was killed on Labor Day at Crigler's home. Police have made no arrest in the assault and killing. I think she was weakened mentally and physically, Musgrove said. What happened speeded up the progress that brought death this quickly because she went through quite an ordeal. Crigler was seriously injured in the assault and had undergone severe stress after learning Jones had been killed, police said.
Like Betty, Kathryn had a full life of joys and heartache that ended prematurely as the result of unthinkable acts of violence. As she passed from this life to the next, the information she provided was key to moving the case forward. Where Betty was silenced, Kathryn was left alive to share what she knew about the monster who eventually claimed her life. Let's take a quick break. While living in Ethiopia, some friends of mine witnessed firsthand the consequences of extreme poverty. They saw how Ethiopian women, in an effort to provide for themselves and their families, were forced to make unthinkable choices just to survive. These friends realized they wanted to give these women another choice, one that would provide them the opportunity to earn a living. It was from this experience that Fashionable was born. This movement started with a collection of hand-woven scarves, of which my wife has many, and has grown to include handmade leather bags and jewelry, apparel, shoes, and most recently, a premium denim line, lovingly crafted by women who have overcome extraordinary circumstances. We're so honored to partner with Fashionable and offer our listeners 15% off their first order. Go to livefashionable.com and use the discount code KNOCK15 at checkout. Again, visit livefashionable.com today to help bring opportunity and choice to these amazing women. Sitting down with Kathryn's family provided many more details about what happened on September 3rd, 1990. I'll warn you, some of this is really hard to hear, but it does help paint a clearer picture of the events of that night and sheds light on the kind of person who would do such terrible things.
No, that was one of the one thing I think that astounded my mother so much, that he could give any kind of consideration to the fact that she might be enjoying this. I don't think anybody who ever heard that could anticipate that. I mean, she wasn't like a 21-year-old and he was a beach bum or something like. I mean, she was, as I said, a cripple. I mean, that is not an inaccurate quote. That is what he said to her. Doesn't this feel good? And said it in such a way that we would not have any doubt that that's what he said. And that what he said, those terms are while the rape was going on. I mean, my wife and I are familiar with that process. I was thinking that I visualized, for example, the process of a rape, the process of a man having sex with a woman, that this is what he was doing when he said, doesn't this feel good? I mean, what it said was, this feels good to me. This feels good to me. Doesn't it feel good to you? Yeah. And she said, it was the last thing that I could tell him what felt good to me at that point. I think that comment she made to me as they were putting her into the ambulance, I don't think I'm going to make it if Betty doesn't make it, was what was on her mind from the time they took her away till the time she died. I don't think I'll make it. I don't think I can make it if Betty doesn't make it. I mean, among other things, it just is, it's indicative of how close they were. I mean, they had known each other all their lives. She looked like a lady who had gone through a certain amount of horror, and who knew by that time that Betty was dead. There was blood on the kitchen floor where she had been sitting while she made the call to the police department. The blood had just literally soaked through the rug, so that it was through the rug and covered most of the floor in the den.
That there was so much blood that it soaked through the carpet into the floor, and that somebody was absolutely killed in this house that we had spent so much time in, and lost her life. Blood was spilled. Her throat was slashed, and there was just a lot of blood. You know Betty. I mean, if you knew Betty, and certainly what I've heard of Betty, yes, she would fight for her life.
Kathryn's account of what happened in her home on Labor Day night is still being studied as evidence by the Starkville police today. Beside the DNA that the murderer left on Kathryn, she also retained the memory of his voice, his smell, and his physical description. To the best of her ability, she contributed that information to the first artist's rendering that appeared in the Starkville Daily newspaper. When she got to the hospital that night, she said repeatedly that she didn't want to live if Betty didn't survive. After she was told about Betty's death, it's clear that she lost any will for her own recovery. I am overwhelmingly compelled to continue the quest for justice in Betty and Kathryn's name. But I'm not naive enough to think that I'm going to get my spyglass and pipe out to go and solve a murder. But I do think I can help people remember. I can talk about these women. I can talk about what happened. And I can shout for justice. And together, only together, maybe we can make a difference. Let's take another quick break. If there's one thing I've learned about Betty through this process, is that her life was dedicated to giving back. I know she would have loved organizations like Thistle Farms. At first glance, Thistle Farms is a world-class provider of natural home and body products. In the summertime, their bug spray is a must. But what is truly amazing about these items are the people who make them. All of Thistle Farms products are lovingly crafted by women, survivors of trafficking, prostitution, and addiction. You see, beneath the surface, what Thistle Farms really is a place that provides safe housing, economic independence, and a strong community of advocates for these women. Take a minute to visit thistlefarms.org and learn more about this amazing organization. And while you're there, use the discount code KNOCK15 for 15% off your first order. That's thistlefarms.org, where love is the most powerful force for change in the world. Kathryn's children and grandchildren were her greatest joys. She derived a lot of pride and purpose in keeping up the loving home in Starkville, where her family gathered frequently to spend time with her. Sadly, the brutal attack that ultimately ended Kathryn's life took place in that cherished house and destroyed the happy memories that Shep, Ann, Juki, and all of her loved ones held so dear. I've been in that house, and I've felt the heaviness. I've imagined the terror they must have felt being stalked in those small rooms. Even today, after all the years have passed, it's painful for friends and family to drive down that street. That house remains as a sad reminder of the two lives that were lost there so very senselessly.
It was, a holiday weekend, and obviously two defenseless elderly women were attacked. One murdered, one that was injured in the attack and left alive. It was. I think everybody was just kind of stunned.
That's Richard Kirby, who we've heard from previously. He was the journalist from the Starkville Daily News who reported on the murders.
It wasn't often that there were murder cases in Starkville. Even though I'd been there, a year and a half at the time, I guess. It was a big deal, especially two elderly women being attacked by someone they didn't know. It was a big story. It was definitely a big story.
I had an aunt, school teacher like Kathryn Crigler, that helped raise me. And so I can, this case ties into, elderly lady, school teacher, Kathryn. It just strikes a chord with me. And it struck a chord with me way back then. And I was fascinated with it.
That's Sergeant Bill Lott, who we'll be hearing a lot more from. He works for the Starkville Police Department and is the lead investigator for Betty and Kathryn's case.
It was a sick, sick crime. And I can't personally see how anybody could do that. And God knows why they would. I certainly have no idea what would motivate somebody to do that. I just really don't. It eventually faded, but I think people were scared because some random guy just walks up to a house. It could happen to anybody.
Next time on Knock Knock.
The profile was developed, okay? What the profile basically is 16 sets of 2 numbers. It'll be like 16, like you 1, 2, all the way down to 16. Then it'll be like a 29, 28, 27, 26, or it can be 23, 20, something else. But you see what I'm saying? It's just a series of numbers.
I had heard that there had been a murder, that someone had broken in and attacked 2 elderly women, lived right off Highway 82. And it was unusual because Starkville's not a place with a lot of murders. It's Stark Patch. That sort of thing didn't happen. So it was unusual to say the least. And I think people were surprised and concerned that something like that had happened, because that just didn't happen in Starkville.
You can't do what this guy did and not do it again. I just don't believe it. I mean, it was so evil. I mean, just raw evil, what he did. So you pray for light.
Knock Knock is produced by Chris Cerrone and me. Special thanks to the Knock Knock team: Lacey Orcioli, Rebecca Jones, Jason Adams, Simon Jones, Cole Flynn, Colleen Jones, and Maggie Thomas. To join the Knock Knock community, be sure and connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Knock Knock Pod. There you can ask questions, leave comments, or just say hi. We've also set up a voicemail at 1-888-57-BETTY. If you have any comments or questions, or you'd like to be a part of the show, please call and leave a message. You can also rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you download podcasts. Reviews are key to keeping Knock Knock on the charts where people can find our show. Our outro music was provided by my friend and one of my favorite artists, Matthew Perriman Jones. To listen to more of his music, please visit mpjmusic.com. We'll be back soon with our next full episode, and we'll post a quick Q&A episode between now and then. So make sure and get your questions and comments in soon. Thanks again for subscribing to the Knock Knock Podcast.
As the sun waits